If there's one thing we hear a lot from authors, it's, oh my goodness, I need to figure out how to spend more time or less time and get somebody else to do the marketing of my book for me. Well, one of the things we don't talk about quite as much with respect to books and visibility is around publicity and PR. And that is what we are going to dig into in this episode. Very excited to have a guest with us, Tracy Lamourie, and we're going to dig into publicity for authors.
Welcome to the Ingenium Books podcast for the author, publisher, changemaker.
Being an author is something that you've got to take seriously.
You're an indie author, you take the risk, you reap the rewards, you are in charge of the decisions, you're the head of that business.
What happens if you start writing your book before you identify your why? What's the problem with that?
The Ingenium Books podcast. Your podcast hosts are Bonnie and John Wagner-Stafford of Ingenium Books.
Hey, that's us. So, Tracy, thanks for joining us all the way from Ontario, Canada.
Hi there. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, and thanks for joining us. So, Tracy, I know that you do a fair bit of business working on the publicity and PR campaigns for authors. But before we get into that, I want you to tell us a little bit about how you got started and what it is that you do exactly.
So I'm an internationally, globally award-winning publicist. And basically what that means, I like to say I elevate and celebrate the amazing word. And that wasn't a PR thing. That literally came to me in a podcast once when I was trying to explain. Someone said, you actually seem really genuine, so I wouldn't think of you as PR. And I said, but I like to elevate and celebrate the awesome things that people are doing that I actually love and appreciate. And one of the things I really love is books. I've always been a book. I've always been a reader. Like, I'm one of those people that has not just one book, but two in my pocket and a couple magazines when I go somewhere. If I have only 3 things I can fit in a bag, one of them is going to be printed matter. So books are among my favorite things. So authors are also among my favorite things to promote. So I got into PR. I've been doing it professionally for 11 years now. Before that, I wrote my first press release 20 years ago, as a young activist to get media attention, ended up getting global media attention. Long story short, it taught me how to play the media game in terms of getting attention for media, how to do it, that missing component that a lot of people don't know. When I say, are you in media? Are you telling media about this? And they're like, how would I do that? Why would they talk to me? Well, I learned how to get heard and seen. And now that's what I do for people and things where I love their projects and I love what they're doing. And, that could be film. I do a lot of work in film. Cannes Film Festival was a recent highlight 2 years in a row. I do a lot of work with startups and entrepreneurs, people who love what they're doing and are putting it out in the world. And again, back to authors, among my favorite. I do probably 40% of my work with authors, sometimes more. And that's fiction authors and it's nonfiction authors. And especially with nonfiction authors, specifically, they're also subject matter experts, which means there are a ton of media opportunities for them, the same as it would be if they were, entrepreneurs or business people in whatever space. So that's what I do is I find ways for people's amazing work to be seen on a bigger level, not just by the people on their street or by their current clients, but on a national, global, local level. And why do people want to do that? It's not just, it's not just advertising, and it's also not just, ego or something, wanting to see yourself in the media. It has real business implications. Number one, it differentiates you from your competitor, or your book from a competitor. It differentiates you as a knowledge expert, whether that's as a business person or more pursuant to this conversation, the information that you put in your book. It differentiates you. Why should I listen to you? Well, these things that you can't buy. It's not advertising. You cannot buy your way to be the one interviewed in Time magazine. You can buy an ad in Time or an ad in Rolling Stone, but you can't buy being that expert that's being interviewed. So how do you get in there? You have to introduce yourself to the media. And these days where it's such a loud, thing, 10 years ago was easier to do that, but now media gets so much incoming email from entrepreneurs and from authors and everything. And the problem is a lot of people don't understand the difference between editorial and advertorial, so they don't know what to send in order to get a positive response. So I help them.
Right. Perfect. Well, that is fascinating. Now, you opened the door to terminology just a second ago, which is where I wanted to go next, which is we often hear PR publicity, and I find it coming out of my mouth, the two phrases, kind of meaning one and the same thing. But I'm going to ask you, in your view, are they the same thing? And if they are not the same thing, what is the difference between PR, public relations, and publicity?
Yeah, I think these days they're more and more used interchangeably, and people definitely use them interchangeably. And I mean, there was an academic difference, at one time, and I think it'd be more that like publicity would be like an event, hey, it's coming here, and then PR would be more like a longer campaign. I would think where it's more about what we call today thought leadership and that sort of thing. And I guess people also think about PR. Usually, they think about it in terms of somebody's done something wrong, and now they need some PR. And I guess that would be called, and that I've I've helped people through challenges that I legitimately saw how they got into in the past, but I don't whitewash anything, for lack of a better word. I'm not into that kind of let's make up a story and you know, but it's more how to do, people get themselves into like crisis management is the other term for it, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that would be more
Issues
PR than
management,
publicity.
crisis management.
PR, crisis management, for example, would fall under, which could be anything like from some false information has gone out there and you have to now handle it to, what it could be anything. Maybe you made a misstep and now you have to account for it. And how do you do? So that could be anything. But generally, in terms of what most authors or most people, business people, are going to have to deal with, for the PR, I would think of it more as a thought leadership campaign, and and publicity more as like this burst of, which could be a burst of publicity for a book launch, a burst of publicity for whatever. That's what I think of it as, a more of a burst kind of thing, that ended up being publicity within a bigger PR campaign, or it could be a standalone thing, like maybe there's an event coming up and you're just doing media advisories, or you're looking at so there's different ways. And of course, in this new world, where there's a lot of things that used to be completely separate are now bleeding into each other too. Like it used to be that the editorial and the advertorial never touched. And now you do, like, ever, ever, ever. And now you do see some situations where media entities that are trying to survive have created a lot more things that are, what we looked at as gray area in the old days, but where you can buy an article. But that's still different from the editorial, and usually it'll say at the top, paid content or something of that nature. But they're selling it, and they're kind of helping you make it look like it's an article, because they're trying to survive too in this new media environment too. So basically, what I liken it to, why would you have a publicist? Well, same reason you might have a lawyer, which is the media landscape is a crazy one, and you're not familiar with it, and there's all kinds of things and blah blah blah. And we've already done the base work, and we already know the players, and we already know what's crap and what's good, and what you want to focus on, and what you don't. And so we can do a lot of that would take anybody else a career the same time that we've done to do it. And you're better off, I always say, if you have the money, get a publicist, because then you're better off focusing on your core business, on your book, on the things I send you, where you're the speaker, as opposed to worrying like a squirrel like me at 2 a.m. looking for the opportunities and pitching yourself to. So we find awards opportunities, we find speaking opportunities, we find media opportunities, primarily to be on television, radio, newspapers, find things that you wouldn't find unless you knew how to access all these different resources and places and contacts. So so it can really open up a whole new world for an author and or an entrepreneur. And also, though, like I say, I always say too, if you have more time than money, it's also worth the stuff that you could do yourself to go, again, always remembering editorial, which is you're giving them the information. You're not looking for a free ad, even though you'll get that benefit of being seen. You have to think of yourself as an information source, providing real information to their actual audience. So when you think about who you reach out to, you're reaching out to media that may actually cover that is actually of interest to their audience. And also, it's just the kind of thing they might cover. Like, you wouldn't probably send most book launch stories are not going to be on the 22 minutes daily news, unless there's a real strong hook or reason it might be mentioned if you're lucky to get it in the topical thing, but they're not going to be like, oh, over there's a book launch, unless it's, Barack Obama or like a major presidential figure or something, because they know everybody wants free advertising. They're not in the business of doing that. They'd love to send you, like I always say, to their ad department. So it truly has to be editorial. So understand and don't, when you're pitching, that's what your role is. And if you can really get your head around that, then you're, an author about a book on, pregnancy or something. You can think about stories. Hey, women these days should be worried about blah, 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 or should be thinking about this, or should be, says the author of whatever. Now all of a sudden you're all over 200 newspapers with your book being mentioned there. The story isn't
Right.
book launched or new book released. The story is the author of whatever says.
Right, whatever the piece of advice is. Yeah, I wanted to tease out the notion of you've mentioned it about the difference between advertorial and editorial, or editorial and advertorial rather. And I wanted to get into how an author might know they're ready for a publicity or PR campaign related to their book, and what they need to consider and know about themselves. And if we can start talking about the notion of control. And so, for example, when you are purchasing an ad, you have complete control over what is being said. In a PR campaign, and you might be mentioned in editorial coverage, but you do not have control over that message. And that might not work for some people. So can you start there and then talk a little bit more about what does an author need to think about and know about themselves before they get into this?
That's a great question in terms of how you said know about themselves, because mostly what people will ask is, when should I promote the book? When should not promote? When should I do this? And my answer is, it really could be any time. It could be before you publish your book. It could be right before. I mean, obviously, if you were looking at a marketing campaign of the book, it's ideal to get it just before you publish, and then we can, promote it, or even 3 months before, because then we can look for reviews with some of those ones that want like a long lead-in time and they want to read the galleys and all that. That's a different. So, but in terms of you getting media, what does media want? Again, they're not there to talk about the launch of your book. They care about you as a subject matter expert, right? So, and also they're probably not going to read your book. You'll be lucky if they do. The reporter that we pitch on Tuesday, and they're going to have you on Friday. They're going to read the back of it. They might read it if you send it to them a couple pages. They're going to read enough to ask you good questions because they're professional, but they're not going to. They don't have time to sit there and read every single book of everybody they interview. It just doesn't happen, right? So, so long story short, you don't necessarily need to have that book there physically. They need to be confident that you are that subject matter expert, which is, here's this book that's coming out, So it could be before, it could be for PR campaign, it could be 10 years after. Because again, maybe we're going to generate new interest in that book and also in you. And now you're still a subject matter expert. And now we're going to get all this new media, blah, blah, blah. So in terms of the timeline, in terms of book publishing, it doesn't matter. In terms of what you're ready for, there's what you're, a better question. And now some people are nervous about it. Media, oh my God, no, I don't want to be on TV, radio. Well, it doesn't have to be TV or radio. 80% of the stuff sometimes we didn't want to be on that. Okay. So then we get them the written interviews where they're doing the first thing they get literally the questions from the reporters. They respond to the questions from the reporters and, boom, that's it. And sorry, guys, I have my daughter's dog in the background. Woo, woo, woo.
That's okay.
Dog sitting, kids. You got to mix those responsibilities. But yeah, sorry. So in a lot of cases, what we get is, easy for them to respond to. We'll get, hey, I see this media opportunity. The reporter wants to ask you about blah, blah, blah. Here's 5 questions. You answer the 5 questions on your own time by email with your publicist help, whatever it is. You send it to the reporter. And guys, talk later. I'm on a podcast. You send it to a reporter, and then you publish. So a lot of times it doesn't have to be that level of ready to be on television. You don't have to be ready for prime time. You just have to know your stuff, know your subject matter. And also, you're not going to be in a lot of gotcha interviews. You probably, depending on, I guess it depends on if you have an extremely controversial subject, or if you're introducing something new where people haven't heard of it before, they may have somebody else on the other side saying, well, I'm not so sure about that. And you have to be ready for those kind of things. So you should really know what could be thrown at you is the only real thing. You should know what are uncomfortable things that the media might ask me about that I wouldn't want to. And if so, how would I respond to that? If you're comfortable with that, you're pretty much ready to go. And again, like I said, if you're working with someone like me, we find the opportunities you're comfortable with. The guy, for example, I had one client, for whatever reason, it's not even a matter of discomfort. Just he didn't want to do television, radio. All he wanted to do was podcast in his niche because that's where he got direct business, and he wanted speaking engagements. So we got him 14 speaking engagements around the world within, 9 weeks or whatever it was. And then we got him to try to podcast, and that's what he was doing. Other people have different goal. We went the whole thing. So maybe sometime we're building up to that. Other times, boom, the first you get a hit on your local TV station in your first go around. So it's a matter of understanding, what media wants, which again is you as a source and an expert. And sometimes, you might have, and another thing people get stuck on is, oh, well, I don't have any news. There's no news. Okay, that's where it's topical and you're a subject matter expert. And because you got to be careful about what you actually send to the media as news. But in another way, you also want them to know if you have something like you won an award, if they don't know you and you don't have a lot of impact in the community, they may not print that in the paper. But now the newsroom knows about it. So that's the first thing they know about you. So the next time they see your name, oh, yeah, they won an award. So sometimes it's about, getting known to the media, even if you don't think that they're necessarily going to pass that on. And, but sometimes they do. And you never know when they're going to need a filler and just want a little positive story. And so, if you're not letting media know, you can bet your competitor is, or your other author is in the other field or whatever, and somebody else is getting those speaking opportunities or is getting those book sales opportunities or whatever it is that you're looking for because they're getting seen. And I always say, again, specifically with authors, I always say this analogy when I'm speaking to authors, but it's true. We've spoken about this before. I always say you put so much effort and time and money and everything into like getting that book published, right? Whether it's money or whether it's time money or whatever it is, you put so much effort into it. So now you think, okay, now I'm just going to put it on Amazon and here they're all going to come to me. And then a lot of authors get a deep emotional dive when they find people aren't running to find a book, but it's not because your book isn't good or because there's no interest. It's because it's just lost in the Amazon and people aren't seeing it. So, you already hear about if you get it reviewed, that's a better way, then it gets higher up there in the thing. But also, once it's in media, when it gets awards or when it's in media, people see it. And, there's like whatever percentage more click through, which I'm sure leads to more buys when it says in your thing that you have, as seen in this news media and that news media, as, here and there. This is the thing that, again, differentiates your book and or you as a subject matter expert and author from the next person and makes people want to buy your book. So I always say not doing that is like literally birthing your baby, having your baby, and then putting it on the shelf and not realizing you have to feed the baby to make it live. So you've got to feed that baby. You have to.
Yeah, exactly. So you and I did a session several weeks ago with a group of our published authors at Ingenium Books, and I wanted to bring in some of these, some of what we talked about with that group of authors then, which was all around how you manage your messages when you aren't in control of the question. So that may be another area that authors, or really anybody who isn't familiar with seeking publicity or being interviewed by news media or editorial media. They're not all necessarily hard news media, but I have a message that I want to get out, and I want to spend my 5 minutes making sure that I get my message out, but they're asking me a question from left field. What do I do with that? How do you coach your clients through what to do with that?
This is the number one thing is always assume they're going to do that, whether it's left field or whether it's relevant or whatever. Just assume that because they have their own agenda, which is not what's in your head. Not that it's a bad agenda, but I mean, they may be on there like, hey, we got this author, we're going to ask her about this, that's not, which is great. You're happy to answer, but then all of a sudden, boom, 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 the time is done, whether it's 30 seconds, 4 minutes, and you haven't had a chance to say what you're going to say. So number one, always try, you probably heard of an elevator pitch, but always try to have, and don't make it all super canned and whatever, like, authentic, but look for the very first opportunity where you can, without being like crazy obvious about not, where you can answer, where you can get your thing in first. So like it could be just the way you're answering. It could be while you're answering, but you're saying, but like in my book, where the main character, blah, 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 like you bring focus on your book, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so that's similar to that, I would say. So in some way, find a way to either answer it or, I mean, you're not, like I said, the best way to say it is find the first opportunity because every interaction will be different, right? But if they come up there and, like, hey, I'm just really happy to have you tell us about yourself. don't miss that chance. If they say, tell us about yourself, that might be your moment. Probably at the end, you're going to have another chance, but they might be needing to give you another chance at the end too. And then time is running, and all of a sudden they're like, cut, and you're gone, right? So when they say that, tell us about yourself, if you get that intro, say the most important thing. I'm the author of whatever. I'm a global award-winning publicist. That's all you need to know. Whatever it is. Say your one little thing that's most important, and then you're good with answering whatever. And then in terms of what you don't want to answer, in most cases, like if you will know if that's going to be an issue. Because if you're just an average author, it's never going to be a problem. Nobody's going to be like, oh, well, I don't know about that yoga book though, but told you they're not going to quiz you like that about most feel good stuff. But some things that are like, we had like a mental health thing or something, you may have another person on the other side who's like, hey, well, no, I think I have a different solution for that. And that could be not like arguing, but it may be something where someone says, well, Bonnie, what do you say to Tracy, who suggests that maybe there's a different way, instead of that, and then if you're like, oh, I don't know. Well, you shouldn't have to do that, because you should already know. And if you've subject stuff well enough, because again, they're not going to be deeply researching, looking for, it's not going to be something you've never heard of. It's probably going to be something that you already know is something people have said to you or whatever. So just be aware of that and think of what you would say in that instance. And most of the time, your answer is going to be fine. Most of the time, it's not going to be a second, third digging at you about it. You're not on 60 Minutes on the hot seat. You know what I mean? So most of the time, you just need an answer.
And sometimes it's a matter too of, there are techniques, bridging techniques and all of those fancy things, which are
that, Bonnie.
You exactly.
That. There's something I really want to talk to you about, Bonnie. I'm really glad that you brought up this, thing, because I think a lot of people have this issue, Bonnie, of not knowing the difference. Meanwhile, by then I've thought of an answer,
Right, exactly. Oh, that makes me think about, whatever you can. And in many ways, it's just a conversation. Not even in many ways, it is a conversation. Of course, the person asking the questions has a different goal in mind, the same way you have a different goal in mind, but it is a conversation. And so all those techniques that work in a regular conversation can work during an interview.
Exactly. Good way to put it. You don't want to freeze up and be under, like I always say, be genuine. Obviously you have a mission while you're there. You have but you're still you, and don't get lost in what should I be doing, or how should I act, or what color should my hair be? Should I, maybe put a wig on, or are they going to take me seriously? Or don't worry about all those things. Worry about your message. The reason you put pen to paper or to keyboard, right? The reason that you started writing is because you have confidence in what you have in those pages. You have confidence, which is your knowledge, which is what you wrote. So with that same confidence that led you to write a book, or to start a business, if you happen to be listening to this and you're not an author, or whatever it is that you want to promote, with that same confidence, or whatever it is that you're building, or a message that you want to put out, someone has to be the conduit for it. Whether you're a person that's like, oh, I don't like to brag about myself, I don't like people looking at me. Well, you put this you wrote this because you wanted people to hear it. So now it can't talk in the media. It can't go on an interview. Guess what? You're elected. So if that's your message, get out there and do it. So for people who are afraid of it, it's not about, they don't want to focus on them. Okay, well, it's not about you though. It's about your message. You are just the conduit to that. You're the expert in that. So if you're not comfortable talking about yourself, it's not about you though, is it? Just like your book isn't about you. This is how you get your message heard in the modern world.
Yeah. So what about ROI, return on investment? Many people are understandably concerned, how am I going to turn this, and how am I going to be able to report to my CFO or whoever it is on how this money and time and effort that I'm spending now on publicity and PR is going to turn into whatever, book sales, paid speaking gigs, or whatever it is. So sometimes it's not a direct line to ROI. And what we always say at Ingenium Books to our authors is that the publishing game isn't a direct line to an ROI, and there are other ways to measure it. But how do you have those conversations with your clients about ROI?
So first, there's two parts of it I wanted to say. So I was starting to answer this, and this is not a bridging thing. There's two parts. You were saying, because because I wanted to mention, okay, first I wanted to talk about what the real ROI is in terms of like not the potentially not like you said, directly measurable. But I always quote this one thing, and this one blew me away because I get a lot of accolades. But one client said to me after 6 weeks of working together, and she was an entrepreneur, a solopreneur client, who had just gone through her seed funding, first, pre-funding or whatever, and was going for her seed funding. And she said, "You've changed my business and my life," after 6 weeks. And when I was like, how, right? That's a good accolade. She said, because you made investors take us more seriously. In that case, it was investors, but it could have been media. It could have been potential clients. It could have been potential buyers or whatever, right? But in her case, it changed everything because now when she was in a room, like if you think about it as an investor, even if we're not investors right now, I have 3 companies or 2 companies I'm going to potentially invest in. They both have beautiful decks. They both have great socials. Everything sounds fantastic in both. But I go and Google one of them, and I only find what they say about themselves on their socials and their website. I go and Google the other. They're quoted in New York Times. They've got an award. They're being mentioned as a game changer there. So which one am I, and I haven't even given the money yet. Who am I going to be more confident to give my money in? Who's obviously a player? Answer is clear. And she didn't have that. She was the same person, but until she had someone looking for these opportunities, who knew the landscape, says, I know where we do this. You should be nominated for this award and that, and all these things that I found, all these things, not just that I knew, but that I found pursuant to her industry, and then pushing media, getting her this attention and that attention, which would have been the same as if she was an author. So because she was going for funding, she saw the direct correlation because she had been going for funding, and then we were together for 6 weeks, and then she went for more funding, and the difference in those rooms was 1,000%. And we always say it impresses everybody from your Aunt Edna, "Oh, honey, you're doing really well these days," to your potential clients, to your potential readers, to everybody who's sharing. You get an article, you're not the only one sharing it. All your friends are sharing it. If you're in business, all your clients are sharing it. "Hey, this is my hairstylist. This is my whatever. This is my," So you're getting that positive. You put that article up in your storefront or whatever. It does what an ad would do. So, but unlike an ad, this is where we get to the other part of your question. There's not a direct, and we're not in the business of sales or marketing. People are like, well, will I sell more books? Probably. It'd be weird if you didn't, but at some point. But I don't know, because I'm not. And they go, "What do you mean you don't know?" I'm not in the business of sales and marketing. I don't even ask for your numbers. I don't know. It's like, because it's not like I'm buying an ad. We're buying an ad, then we're looking to see who bought from that ad. We're not looking. It's not like that easy. It's not that kind of correlation. It's more the general. Now we've elevated your thought lead, so now you don't even know when it's in your bio, but now you've got that speaking engagement because of those 3 articles. And I know for sure because I've done it for myself. Even in COVID, I started spending more time on my own, even though I had still had clients. At the very beginning of COVID, I'd lost like 70% of it because it was all out, didn't work, that was shut down because of COVID. And so then I was like, okay, well, if I can't travel, my voice can still travel. I started doing podcasts, not just for my clients, but I started doing podcast interviews, talking about like this kind of thing, my expertise, and not just podcast interviews, but television panels, and got nominated for a couple of awards, which I heard about, that I nominated my clients for. Anyway, I can tell you now that my bio says as seen in Rolling Stone and in NBC TV, and the winner of the whatever, and the nominee of that, and the winner of that. Not only, because here's where it gets real too, not only are you talking like esoteric, it doesn't matter if you're an author talking about your book, this is also about you as a person, and this is your thought leadership. And now when you go to your next job interview, or when you go to whatever the heck it is you're doing in life, I tell you, the difference with people who've seen my bio and know that bio, the way they treat me compared to just walking into a room when nobody knows me or whatever like that, 100%. Now, the difference between, and it's my bio, and the confidence that the bio brings, because those are 2 things that go together, because you start to see, now the difference. I don't apply for jobs. I mean, I haven't had a resume in 20 years, but even if we have a client call, somebody wants to talk to them, potentially hire me, I'm feeling like I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me. I don't need any client. They, and I'm not like they need me more than, it's not like that. It's a matter of, I need to find people that I'm good for, and that that we work well together, that I love their mission, I love what they're doing, and I feel like in here, I know, because I always say, how do you pick a publicist? If they're not excited about what you're doing, that's probably not your publicist, even if they're a good publicist. If I'm like, if you tell me about your approaches, and I'm like, oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I can see that. Then no, right? It should be like, oh my God. And the people are always like, oh, you're so enthusiastic. Yeah, because I'm legitimately getting excited about the possibilities, and I see the potential and all that. So there's real, while it's not as directly correlated it can't help but elevate you, your reputation, your book, you know, so it's all part of that. Part of it is about book sales. Part of it is about, you know, having you just be more impressive when you want to, now when you want to go, say you want to go and speak at the next, you know, the Frankfurt Book Festival or something. Well, they're going to look at you a lot different. Hey, I just wrote a book and it's a really good book. Or like, hey, the award-winning author who's appeared on blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it can be a game changer. And as you said right at the very beginning, elevate and celebrate. That's what it is all about. And we are up to our time. We have a self-imposed time limit of 30 minutes. We could go longer if we wanted to, but I like to try to give our listeners what they are expecting and what they're used to. So Tracy, I want to thank you so much for joining us, giving us the insights, and your energy and your optimism is absolutely infectious, and really appreciate having you join us today.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Bonnie, and I love the work that you're doing too, and I look forward to more great stuff from Ingenium.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Ingenium Books podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, but also consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, where you can see these episodes in addition to hearing them.